Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I'm Annika Jackson, back with another episode of Your Brand Amplified, and I'm so thrilled to be here with Tyler Foley today. Tyler, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing really well, other than what you and I had discussed offline about doing the most typically Canadian thing that I could do. And as a hockey goaltender, take a puck to the throat a couple of days ago. The good news is I made the save.
Wow.
But it has definitely altered my voice in a very unique and interesting way for the last 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. Well, say that you are dedicated to your craft no matter what you're doing.
True story. True story.
So you are a film and stage performer. I mean, you've been acting since you were a child. You've been in a lot of movies, TV series, and you've taken a pivot. So I want to hear more about the background and what you still love about being an entertainer, and then the pivot that you took for anybody who's listening who might not be familiar with that side of you.
Yeah. So as you'd mentioned, child performer for almost 20 years. I started on stage when I was 6 and then got into film and television in my later teens and did what most people do when they've been in a vocation for 20 years, and I retired. And I went back to school, got an engineering discipline, and started my own business in photogrammetry. So for anybody who doesn't know, that's Earth pictures and picture maps. So if anybody's ever turned on satellite view on Google, that's what I did. I stitched those pictures together in what are called ortho photos. And that business was going to be my retirement plan. My uncle was a photogrammetrist. My other uncle was a cartographer. My grandfather was a surveyor. So it was in my blood. And my uncle actually ran a really, really successful and well-known mapping firm. And I was following the family footsteps, and that was going to be my thing. And unfortunately, my business partner passed away a few years into that venture, and we didn't have the right director's insurance. And she really was, my mentor. She was my partner, and she had 20 years industry experience, and I had about 5. So she really was the brains behind the operation. And without her, it just basically shuttered overnight. But as part of that business, your primary client is the government. And when you're working with the government, they insist that you have a safety program in place. And so we had to develop a safety program for our business. And I had to take all this safety training. And so a really good friend of mine and a brilliant businessman and strategist, Matt, he was also my best man at my wedding, reached out to me and he said, listen, you have all of this safety training. And if you take these couple of other courses, you can actually get your National Construction Safety Officer designation. I need a safety manager, and you need to have this designation to go work up on this site.
Amazing.
If I pay for the courses, would you come work for me? I was like, sure.
Yeah.
That seems like a good thing, because I was lost, right? I didn't know what I was going to do. So we did that. I worked for him and I started this new career as a safety professional. And what I found was that I didn't know a lot about safety. And most of what I knew about safety, I actually learned from doing stunts in film and television.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And I ended up applying a lot of that to my interactions with the employees, because there were a lot of electricians and construction workers. And I am not a laborer. I am not built for physical labor. I'm 135 pounds, about 5'8", and they knew it. But I could relate to them. I could be like, listen, that's not safe. They're like, what do you even know? I'm like, listen, I used to jump out of buildings for a living. And I promise you, what you're doing is more dangerous than me jumping out of a 6-story window.
Jeez.
And that usually would catch them by surprise. And it kind of became my signature speech.
Yeah.
And one day, an executive had heard me saying it, and he pulled me aside and asked if, is that true? I said, is what true? Said, is you jumping out of windows the safest thing that you ever did? I was like, oh yeah, hands down. And he was fascinated by it. He asked me if I would give it as a toolbox talk the next day. And so I did. And another executive was there and heard it. And he came and asked me, is that true? I said, is what true? Did you used to jump out of windows? Yes. And he's like, would you give that as a presentation at our next safety stand down? I said, absolutely. And then I had to quickly rush back to my trailer and find out what a keynote was, because I didn't know.
Oh, wow.
So I did my research and I was like, 45-minute talk. Yeah, I could do that. That's easy. I could talk for hours. So I gave this presentation, and a few of the executives at that company reached out to me and they said, that was hands down the best safety presentation we've ever seen. And without too much of a brag, I like to think that I do that because most safety presentations are an invitation to a lobotomy. They are so boring, and I don't like them to be boring, and they don't need to be boring. They can be very engaging and highly interactive. And when you do that, they're entertaining, they're informative, and your audience gets the message. And one of the executives said, listen, I'm horrible at public speaking, and you seem to have this really good gift. What's your secret? I'm like, well, I've been doing it since I was 6, so I better know what I'm doing. Then he wanted to know, right? And the more I talked to him, he's like, would you coach me? And I'd never even thought at that time. I didn't even know what an executive coach was. I didn't understand coaching. Like, to me, I grew up playing hockey. So to me, the coach is the coach. He's the guy on the bench, taps you on the back, says, get out there, kid. Or in my case, says you're not playing good enough and pulls me from the net to replace me with the backup goalie, and that was my idea of coaching. And so it took me a little bit to really wrap my head around what this executive coaching was. And then when I started doing it, it rapidly went from a part-time side hustle to basically the full-time focus of my consulting practice, where I stopped doing the safety training and I stopped doing the safety consulting and I stopped doing the safety auditing. And I really started focusing on this executive coaching side, where I show people how to really give good presentations. And initially it was a safety focus, but now it's just, how do we tell your story? How do we tell it effectively? How do we get you comfortable on stage? How do we get you up on stage so that you can get your message out, in a rapid fashion, in a very impactful way? And it's led to the training courses. It's led to the stage appearances. #1 best-selling book. Yay. Quick plug.
Yay.
So it's just been a really interesting journey for me, and one that I'm very grateful to have gotten to take.
Yeah. What an interesting story. I didn't know some of that. Like, I didn't realize that in between part of moving into engineering and safety. And then that's how you started all this other stuff. So you have, your #1 best-selling book, The Power to Speak Naked. You have endless stages. And with that, a lot of brand extensions. I mean, I'm in the Facebook group that you have, and you add a lot of value for entrepreneurs of any size to hone their skills. As we know, how you present is one of the most important things that you need to know. And most people don't hone that skill. And then they go, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do if I'm going to progress in my career, if I'm going to sell my product?
And the funny thing is it's one of the easiest skills to build upon, because we have opportunities to speak in public every day. And I don't think we recognize it or embrace it. And it's simple things too. Like, when me and my family go out for dinner at a restaurant, I always make my daughter order her own food, and we don't speak for her. She has her own voice, and she can speak, and she can learn to speak up too. Cause that's the thing. Sometimes she's shy and she doesn't want to say, and she kind of mumbles her order like this. Right. And then the waitress says, I'm sorry, what? And I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me like, well, you tell her. And I'm like, no, you explain what it is that you want. And it's little things like that where we have those opportunities. There's always an opportunity at your work to speak up, even if you're not an executive or in a leadership role. People are always looking for people to present, because nobody wants to do it. And if you're the one to put your hand up, suddenly you become a leader, and that puts you on the radar for promotions, for raises, for advancement. It helps you understand what your strengths are, where your knowledge base lies. And that helps you if you're looking to transition in your career, where to go. Like, there's so many things that are informed when you take the opportunity to public speak.
Yeah. I know, thinking about your example with your child, I have an introvert, but she has no problem speaking up. She wants to order for everybody. And so it's something that I'm very proud of in her, because even though I know she'd rather be at home reading a book or doing something quiet, if she has to, I mean, if she pushes herself, she's in Model United Nations. She has to go give speeches. And so I think those things for some of us, because from an early age, I also was a little bit shy, reserved, and I knew I had to push myself out and do activities, and those school activities that helped me get in front of people and get comfortable speaking. But a lot of people don't do that until later. So what are some actionable things that people can do to infuse little steps to get comfortable speaking in their daily lives? Well,
the first one is recognize every time you're speaking in public, because that's usually the first lie that we tell ourselves, is that we're afraid to speak in public. And yet, going back to the restaurant example, if you have sat down and ordered food, you have spoken in public. And if you didn't know your wait staff, you were speaking to a complete stranger. And if you got the food that you requested, you were able to ask for what you want and get it. So usually the lies that we're telling ourselves are, we're afraid to speak in public, we're afraid to speak to strangers, and we're afraid to ask for what we want. And all of those things are null and void if you've ever gone to a restaurant and gotten the food that you wanted. So recognizing those opportunities where they are. So, you're at a bank teller, and simple things like that too, like don't go to the ATM.
Mm-hmm.
Go to a bank teller. Don't do the self-checkout at the grocery store. Go to the checkout clerk. All of these are opportunities for us to have a public interaction with the stranger and speak very quickly. And just have some small talk. That's a really excellent skill to build your networking skills as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then those networking opportunities, anytime you have a chance to go to a networking event. And it's funny that you mentioned introverts. I'm an introvert. And a lot of people don't realize that because I have this outgoing personality, but the outgoing personality is an exercised extension specifically to deal with the fact that I would rather be at home. I am unbelievably uncomfortable in a group. And that's the other thing you can start working on is expressing those things that you see or view as weaknesses or areas of improvement for you and letting the world know about it, because you'd be surprised at how quickly they become your strengths and how quickly other people who are trying to overcome that as well will look to you as a leader because you were the one to say, I struggled with this and this is what I'm doing to work on it.
Wow.
So look for those opportunities and then really embrace your own story and learn what your story is, learn how to tell your story effectively. And that will give you those opportunities to turn to it.
Have you seen the way that you have to coach people for communication change now that we're in a more virtual setting versus live?
Yes and no. So the principles are the same. And it's interesting because I had to do basically this thing that we did in 2020, I had to do around 1996.
Really?
Because I transitioned from stage acting to film and television acting.
Okay.
And they're two totally different worlds. And yet you're doing technically the same thing. And so the technical aspect of public speaking, how you structure your talk, where you find your stories, how you use your stories to emphasize points, how to structure your stories so that you are the sage and mentor and not the hero, which is usually the main mistake that people make when they're telling stories. All of that hasn't changed. What has changed is what I had to do. This medium of stage to camera, because on camera, your actions need to be a little bit more limited and a little bit more deliberate. You need to know what your frame is. You need to be able to know how to connect with your audience. With a stage presentation, you need to be a little bit more bigger. But if you get too flamboyant on camera, it just becomes distracting. But at the same time, on stage, you can actually dial down your energy level. It sounds weird, but because you have the microphone in front of you and because you have other people who are dealing with sound volumes and lighting and all the rest of it, you can be animated, but you can really take the energy and let it build and grow and play with it. Where on camera, because you need to be so conservative, you actually need to amp up your energy level. You need to have more life in your eyes, more life in your voice, because it needs to come through. And especially on a medium like this, where there are going to be people who don't have the benefit of my visual.
Right.
Because we're recording a podcast, there are going to be people who are going to listen to this just audio. Now everything needs to come through with my voice. And so again, we go back to the technical stuff that doesn't change, the 4 Ps and the 5 Ps, and how are we using our pace, our pitch, our pauses? What are we doing as far as projection goes? All of those things still apply. It's understanding the medium and altering the delivery so that it meets the method to which you're meeting your audience.
Yeah. Wow. This is all so much great content, so much great advice for the listener, because I know a lot of people struggle with this and struggle with how to present themselves, how to feel comfortable being on camera or feel comfortable presenting in front of a group. It's a big aha moment if you have gone to a restaurant and you've spoken to a stranger and you've ordered and you got what you wanted. I think people get scared of thinking about business development and sales and marketing and putting ourselves out there. But if you distill it down to that level, it makes it really easy to understand, like, oh yeah, I do this every day. I can do it, no problem. And building up that confidence of going into that next meeting and making that killer sale.
Well, and I think if I could give one bit of advice on sales is quit trying to get sales.
Yeah.
It's what I tell everybody who goes into a networking event, right? You're not looking for your next client. You're looking for your next strategic business partner.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that person may not need the thing that you are selling, but they may know 10 people who do.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised at how refreshing it is for a potential prospect to hear you tell them no. The number of times I've told somebody, listen, I don't think we're a good fit. These are people that I know who are training that I think you might work with better. And then they start reverse pitching me. What do you mean? No, you don't understand. No, you are who I want to work with because of this, 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 and this. And I'm going, listen, I appreciate that. You trust me. You want to try this. And they're like, no, you. And I'm like, okay, maybe me. I've had that. And I've also had people who were so refreshed when I said, listen, I don't think this is a right fit for us right now. Work on this over here. Here's some of the things that I would recommend, and then come back and talk to me. And you may grow past it too. Like you may want to leap step me too, like go from here over to here, depending on your progress. They will go and be my champions. They're like, you have no idea the integrity he has. He told me no. I was ready to write him a check and he told me no. If you want to go and work with them. And I've gotten a lot of business that way. So if you go in looking for strategic partners as opposed to clients, it changes the language, it changes the energy. And I think you'd be surprised at if people adopt that mentality, how quickly their business kind of turns around, because it kind of forces you to come from a place of integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. So going to that, what are the kinds of people, or who are the kinds of people that you do like to work with? And can you share some aha moments that some of your clients have had?
Yeah. So my favorite clients, unfortunately, are the ones who can't really pay a lot.
Preaching to the choir.
Usually because they are charity directors or startup entrepreneurs with a social conscious business, typically have a hard time identifying what their story is. They know who they want to help and they love helping people, but they themselves are struggling with feeling of significance. And so they either feel that their story doesn't matter, or their story isn't important, or that somebody else has done it bigger, better, brighter, stronger, faster. And don't recognize the brilliance within themselves. And so those are usually the clients that come to me the most and that I get the most reward out of, because it's one thing to coach an executive who's making 7 figures and get them to be able to give, their annual presentation a little bit better.
Right.
That's great. It helps me and my family go on vacations, but it doesn't have that sense of reward that helping somebody who is, has a real social conscience, who is doing beautiful things within their community, grow and expand their influence and their reach, because that's rewarding. And one of the aha moments that I had a client very early on who was a friend, brilliant psychologist. And she had this idea of doing virtual therapy. And everybody, including her college, said that you couldn't do that. You physically had to interact and be present with the patient in order to help them. And she was like, I don't understand why. Like half the time, patient doesn't even look at us. I can read the body language of somebody, like there are these technologies that I'd like to explore. And she knew that there was a better way, but she had a hard time articulating it, and was one of the few people that I've met. And I've met thousands of people that I've coached over the last decade. She is one of the few people who legitimately is afraid of public speaking. Most people are not afraid of public speaking. They tell themselves that they are, but as we've already discovered, that's not the reality. The reality is they're afraid of public judgment, so they don't open up their mouths when people are looking at them. But this particular woman was legitimately like full on terrified. It was a phobia. And she was a psychologist. She knew she could identify, she could self-diagnose. And so that was a bit of a struggle, because most of what I do is work with people who are lying to themselves, not with people who legitimately have a phobia. And so hers was a very unique case study for me, because she had a real fear. And so not only did we have to overcome an actual real fear, but we had to give her a reason enough to do those baby steps that it became a reason to challenge the fear. And, we did little things like, this was when Live first started, like Facebook Lives. Within about 2 or 3 weeks of that coming out, I'm like, you need to go and do a Facebook Live. She's like, what? I'm like, you never know. Maybe one person will watch it. Maybe 10 people will watch it live, but I want you to see how many people go and watch it afterwards. Just see the views. And I think she got like 120 views. Like, it wasn't massive, and I think when she did it live, I think 2 or 3 people came on and watched, but she couldn't see that. And I was like, just imagine now you've talked to 100 people, 120 people.
Yeah.
Goes, yeah, I guess I did. I'm like, see, it wasn't that bad. She's like, yeah, but I couldn't see them. I'm like, okay, the next time you give a presentation, it's totally against what we should do. Turn your back to the audience, right? Give your presentation, use slides. Let's try to animate those slides. We're going to take all of the text away, because you're going to become a narrator for this story.
Yeah.
but you're going to keep your back to the audience. And it felt so awkward to her to not face the audience that she got into her rhythm and she forgot the audience was there and then turned around and started talking to them and forgot that she was supposed to be afraid of them. It was a beautiful breakthrough. Now, the best part is what was limiting her ability to expand her practice was this fear of public speaking. And so she had a hard time talking to investors and she couldn't translate her vision. She couldn't translate her idea. She couldn't really explain the importance of it. And for her, her ultimate end goal was to be able to develop a practice where she could reduce the costs of delivery by not having to have a large waiting room and administrative staff and rent, in an accessible area, make it cheaper for people because they don't have to pay for parking. They don't have to pay for transit or however they're getting to her. She can then reduce her costs, still earn a higher profit margin, be able to subcontract out the therapy to other therapists who are now able to work from home part-time and fill in some of the gaps. And then the end goal was you'd have the paying clients who are 80% of their clients and 100% of the revenue. And then using that, deliver free care to the people who really need it in socially isolated areas. So we're talking like here in Canada, she really had a push to make sure that reserves, particularly in Northern territories, were able to get some mental health care. And she just made it available for free and anybody could apply and it was granted. So that was her end vision. She ended up being able to conquer this fear or at least suppress it enough that she was able to function in front of an audience and start pitching these investors of 20 and 30 people groups to the point where she was able to raise the funding that she needed to be able to do it. And she's grown her practice from a very low 6-figure practice to an 8-figure international mental health care delivery system and doing it before COVID. So she had the infrastructure in place in 2018, had proved the model in 2019. And then in 2020, when the world collapsed and everybody needed mental health care virtually,
she was ready.
She was at the forefront of it and went from a 7-figure to an 8-figure company essentially overnight. And that to me has always been my greatest reward as a coach because I can see the ripple effect of that. And I can't say that I had much to do with it, but I definitely know that I was a catalyst in helping her get to that next step. And that feels really rewarding.
I love that. I was getting chills while you're sharing that story. I'm on the communication, the PR side of things, a little bit of branding work. And it's the same thing for me. I like to work with the same kind of clients, find fulfilling, heart-centered work. And I love it when somebody wins big and I see that change in how they feel about themselves and how they can represent their company and that they know that they're in the right place and doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, again, it makes me feel good because I'm just a pretty face with usually a really good voice. When I don't
you still have a good voice, even when you have a puck to the throat.
And I have to thank Roger Love for that because I've had the privilege and joy of working with him. And all I can hear is him in the back of my head right now going, give it more air, just a little bit more air. And it's nice because I'm not having to strain my voice, but it definitely sounds altered. Like I know where my voice is right now. But, for me, this is something that could be a very limited talent, right? Where I could go and I could be on stage and I could sell the course and I could push the book, or I can help other people learn how to do this, still generate revenue, but have satisfaction that comes with it too. And I think that's the bit that is more important for me. One of my favorite charities that I work with here in Calgary, Made by Mama, I volunteer my services to them twice a year to MC their charity events, just because it's my way of giving back. And anytime that I can have a social impact with what I do, that's important to me, particularly for me, because it's so meta. I speak on speaking that it could very easily become like a 1990s guy in suit on stage selling product thing. And I just don't want to do that.
So while you're working with big corporate executives, what are some of the ways that smaller businesses can work with you or interact with you?
Oh, well, there's a couple of different ways. I mean, you had mentioned the Facebook group. Anybody can come to Endless Stages, and that's a quick, free way to work with me. If they come through our website, either through my website, SeanTylerFoley.com, or through the Endless Stages website, endlessstages.com, instead of searching for it on Facebook, then you get access to a couple of free resources. So we give you a free PDF download of my book, The Power to Speak Naked. We give you access to the Drop the Mic training series. That was really designed as an introductory for me. I always wanted to have something that I could give to somebody for a very low, if not free cost, and be like, here, study this. And the Drop the Mic program is 7 videos, less than 5 minutes each. So it's under 35 minutes. If you consumed it once a day, it's 5 minutes a day. And within that week, you would have the beginning exercises to really start to build your repertoire as a speaker, learn how to use some of these very simple techniques to come better at the skill and start to grow that muscle. And so that was important to me to at least have something like that. And so they get access to Drop the Mic, and then obviously the Facebook group where, as you had mentioned, we try to put up as many resources as we possibly can. I really don't like selling to the group. So if you go through the previous posts, it's going to be primarily resources. And then make sure when you go, what most people don't do, they just sign up into the group and then they ignore my emails, because now you're in the email list and you're going to get those first 5 or 6, introductory emails, and they forget to read them. And in the reading them, there's actually a member site where you have access to all of our previous videos and things like that. So they'll go into the group and they'll be like, well, there's a couple posts here and whatever. And then they don't interact. They don't understand that there's a whole massive resource on the membership side if you actually go in and sign into your membership. So do take an opportunity. That's the quick way at no cost. Get a sense and an idea of what I'm doing. And frankly, learn everything that I'm going to teach anyway. Because that's one of the things that I've always felt is important. I should be accessible no matter how much you can pay. And all that finances dictate is how much access to me personally you get in a given week. Right.
That's a great model.
For free. You don't get any personal access to me, but you get all the pre-recorded stuff. And frankly, there's no difference between it. I try to make sure that everything that I would teach one-on-one is the same thing that I'm going to teach one-on-many, is the same thing that I'm going to teach one-on-virtual. The difference is one-on-one, people get my personal phone number, my personal email, and I'm working with them at least once a week for a couple of hours and really honing their skills. Where, if we're doing a group thing, or like if you come to one of my large seminars, Power to Speak Naked event, which is usually a 2.5 day training, you're going to be in a group of 250 people, but you're still going to have access of me walking through the crowd, checking in on people's stories, using people as examples, because it's not about me. It's about you. It's about your story. And I can tell my story 1,000 times. Most people have heard it, but I haven't heard yours. So let's use yours as an example instead of mine. So, it just depends on how they want to go. But I don't want people paying $1,500 to come to one of my workshops if they don't have an idea of what they're getting first.
Right. Yeah. That
so
makes a lot
even
of sense.
people who sign up for the workshops are going to get access to all the free stuff because I need them to know ahead of time.
Well, and it helps build up. They might already know who you are. That's established by that know, like, and trust factor, and seeing how they actually can work with you and get more value. So I did want to go back to something you'd said earlier, which I think is also a really helpful hint and tip about when you are speaking, don't make it salesy, but also don't make yourself the hero of the story.
Yeah. It's the biggest mistake that I notice people make. And if you're not familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey model, very quickly and very Reader's Digest bastardized, you will have the hero who is in a state of unaware, right? They're in a state of stasis. They don't know what's happening until there is a crisis moment that sends them into a state of turmoil, at which point they meet the sage or mentor who guides them through a series of trials and tribulations so that they are eventually able to meet their main nemesis, overcome that nemesis, and then begin their journey home. And there are many steps in there, but those are the main basic ones. And where most people get their storytelling wrong is they try to tell their story from the point of the hero and take everybody through that hero's journey. And it's not necessary. The reality is they've done the trip. They've made it from state of unaware back to a return home, having changed for the better. And so what's important is, instead of speaking to your audience as though you are the hero, you need to be the sage and mentor who is now about to guide your audience, who is the hero, on a similar journey so that they can learn, so that they can overcome their nemesis, whatever it is. And it's that subtle change that makes all the difference in the world.
Mhm.
And for people who need a better example, you are not Luke Skywalker, you're Obi-Wan Kenobi. And if Star Wars is not your gig, you are not Harry Potter, you are Dumbledore. And I promise you that's the exact same story arc.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those illustrations. The other thing that I think is interesting in your book is the power to speak naked. But one of the other tips that you recommend is not to visualize your audience naked. Because, the old way of teaching, okay, just think about everybody in their underwear. Think about everybody naked.
Absolute worst advice ever. It's actually how the book got its title, because I was on a deadline actually to get the cover art ready to my publisher. My publisher was like, listen, we need a title so that we can create the cover art, and you need to have it basically by this day. And night before the title was due, because the book was written by transcribing all of my training videos. Because again, as an actor, I recorded everything, right? I recorded my sessions, and particularly my large stage ones, initially just because I wanted to appreciate this being in PR, I needed to have something for my reel.
Yeah.
So we had hours and hours and hours of footage, and we ended up just transcribing that footage and putting it together in the book. So the book came before the title ever came. And we were brainstorming with my team, and I'm like, "What? Okay, it's an advice book. So what's some advice that you've gotten on public speaking? People did this," and then that one came up. Picture your audience naked. And I went on this tirade about how it is the most ineffective thing that you could do, that it's disrespectful to your audience. Your audience is a treasure. You should treat them like the golden gift that they are, that it's a waste of mental energy that could be better put to use concentrating on your audience, serving your audience. And at the end of it, I was like, I would rather give somebody the power to speak naked on stage than to tell them to picture their audience naked. And everybody went, ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Say that again. And so the power to speak naked came from a rant about how picturing your audience naked is horrible advice. And it's true, because your audience will give you back the energy that you give them amplified. Because you got to remember that is what an audience does. They are an amplification device for whatever you're putting out to them. And to me, if you're putting out a negative energy, if you're trying to gain comfort out of somebody else's discomfort, that's amplified back to you. And all it does is that energy flow and make it worse for you. Because I promise you, at some point, you're going to do this. You're going to be like, well, if I'm picturing them naked, what if they picture me naked? And then you will spiral. I would rather concentrate on how do I leave this audience better than I found them. And specifically, I don't try to change the whole audience. The whole audience is not your audience. But there is one person in that crowd who above all else needs to hear what you're saying.
Yep.
And if you can speak to that one person, you will likely influence the rest. And so I make it a mission to try and find who is that one or that two or those three people who are in the audience that I need to connect with instantly. Who are the ones who are the most engaged that I can come back to, that can be my anchors. And then in speaking to them, they will energetically have an influence over their area of the audience. And that will start to permeate through. And I know it sounds frou-frou and woo-woo, but there is scientific evidence to back it if anybody ever wants to read up on heart math. And I have anecdotal evidence, having done this for almost 40 years. I know when I'm starting to have an effect, and I can see how when I connect with one person, how it ripples through the audience. It's amazing.
I love it. Yeah. I'm all for the woo-woo. I'm all for that energy, and the gratitude and the things that we put out are the things that we get back. Yeah. So negative or positive.
It's true. And it's amazing. Like, people really need to understand that the audience will amplify your energy. If you're excited, they're excited.
Yeah.
If you're happy, they're happy. If you're sad, they're sad. And it's a power that a speaker has that needs to be treated with utmost reverence, especially if you're going to take your audience on a journey. Like, sometimes you need to make them feel sad. One of the best talks I've ever seen in my life was delivered by a gentleman. He titles it The 10-Minute Time Machine, and he talks about some heavy, heavy subject matter. And there are points where within that talk, the audience is sobbing.
Wow.
Absolutely devastated, feeling for him, feeling for his children, feeling for his family. But he also makes you laugh. He understood dynamically how to take somebody on a journey. Because if you're going to bring somebody to a low, you need to bring them back to a high, and you need to leave them better than you found them. So leave them on the low. You have not done your job.
Yikes.
But they will feel your energy, and you have the ability to, as horrible as a word as it is, manipulate your audience. And so you need to make sure, and that's the thing that I'm always trying to preach to every one of my clients. You need to leave your audience better than they found them. You need to treat them like the sacred gift. If you are uncertain of where that story is going to go, do not tell the story. Wait until you know it. And the other big mistake that I see people make, if they've learned, you're not the hero, you're the sage, and they can tell that story. One of the other big mistakes that I see people make is never talk from open wounds, only talk from the scars. The scars have healed and are the lessons that you've learned. The open wounds are the lessons you still need to learn. And I see a lot of people speak from open wounds. They haven't learned the lesson yet. And all you're doing is taking your audience on your own journey that you haven't completed yet. So you are just blindly hacking at vegetation, hoping that you're not taking them off a cliff, and you don't know yet.
Powerful. So Tyler, what's on the agenda for 2023?
My 2023 was beautifully mapped out until New Year's Eve. When I got some of the most devastating news that I could. And that is that the main promoter that I typically work with, we had 6 events planned for this year. I was going to have some really, really beautiful stages. He passed away.
Oh my gosh.
The day before New Year's Eve. And so now I don't know what is on the table. That's one of those, wounds versus scars. I really don't know what's going to go on. The last 2 weeks have been very numb for me.
I'm so sorry.
That I haven't really had a good sense of what the next step is. But I do know that regardless, as they say in show business, the show must go on. I just don't know what the show is. And so we're really doubling down on the virtual training. I'm going to definitely amp up what I can do as far as influence people from my own studio. And make that a concentrated effort, at least over the next month or two. And then if there is the demand for the live events, which I have yearning in my heart for, but I don't know what the world needs. So I will wait for a little bit more divine influence on what needs to happen. And the goal is to keep moving forward. I do want to continue to have the events. I've had my eye on putting on a big destination event in Vegas for 200 to 250 participants. When we did it the last time, the winner of the event, we had it as a kind of idol style competition, got to speak on stage with Tony Robbins. Unfortunately, that connection is now severed. So I've got to figure out, talk to a couple of different promoters, reach out to my network, see what we can do so that I can give that reward to somebody who works really hard and really hones their story over 2.5 days. But until I can do that, I'm kind of put that event on pause or find out another way to deliver some big value. Because if people can't walk away from an event changed, there's no point in going to it. So I want to make sure that I'm delivering the highest value for the money paid.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss, and I'll look forward to continuing to follow you and get your updates on what you do next. And when you do have live event, be there to cheer you on. So,
and I am looking forward to having you in the audience, Annika, because it's one of those things where I love making sure that I'm maintaining relationships, those connections. You never know. And especially as you know, in the PR business, they say there's no such thing as bad PR, but there is.
Yeah, there is.
you can have negative press. And I think it's important when you maintain those relationships that people understand who you are, because we are all flawed human beings. And sometimes we do make mistakes. So you want to make sure that people have a good sense of who you are at your best so that they know when you're at your worst and can help you.
Yeah. Do you have any final words of wisdom, a favorite quote, mantra that you'd like to share?
Yes. And that is, and we alluded to it over the course of the interview, but I really want people to take away from this, that it doesn't matter where you are in your journey, you have a story to tell. You have no idea the impact that your story could have until you tell it, because you don't know who needs to hear it until they have. And so finding ways of owning your story, finding a way of discovering your story if you don't yet know it, and finding opportunities to tell the people who really need to hear it is critical. And you'd be surprised at the doors that opens when you have the bravery to step into the light and tell your story in a powerful and authentic way. So know that you matter, your story matters, and you don't know who needs to hear it until you tell it. So go find that opportunity.
Awesome. And with that sage advice, thank you for another great show. Thanks to our audience for coming back for another episode of Your Brand Amplified. I will have endless stages and other ways that you can reach Sean Tyler Foley. via the interwebs in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story and so much wisdom with our audience today.
It was my joy and my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And to the audience, I'll be back again in another couple days with another amazing expert guest. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.